I really think of you as a DP that really likes to try to push the envelope when it comes to technologies. So I would love to sort of pick your brain a little bit as to how when you design a look, when you're working with a director, when you're reading a script, how you sort of go through that process and come up with the right camera and lens package. So maybe we'll start kind of at the beginning. Even with movies like Curious Case of Benjamin Button, it's a very VFX heavy project, groundbreaking really at the time. We now think of de-aging as not really that big of a deal, right? With all the recent developments with technology, but back then it was certainly groundbreaking. So can you talk a little bit about that and your sort of experiences, because you're shooting with digital cinema cameras at the time, correct? It was I think you said it was Vipers and Sony F23s.
It was Viper in the beginning, and then we just had some issues with some sound, that the Vipers are very loud when we had these really quiet scenes. So for the hospital scene, we flipped to F23, mainly just because it was a quieter camera, and we didn't mind it having a different look to it. So that whole movie has a cycle, going back from the past, where we had this warm and smoky environment, and we kind of clean it up and get sometimes a little bit less romantic with the look. For instance, there's a scene in the train station where I have, glorious light coming through the windows, and it's very shafty and smoky and beautiful. And then, Finch and I were talking about and just saying, we want to make this modern look kind of really depressing. Like the station is just, it's got a digital clock up instead of the old, analog clock. And I just sort of threw up this suggestion, let's just turn on the house lights that were on stage. And I just turned on the house lights on stage, and that was the shitty modern look that we had, We looked at it, that looks crappy and depressing, and we just went with that.
Oh, that's great. Did you, when you speak to directors or when you're looking at a script, what other considerations do you have when it comes to like the type of equipment or how you kind of decipher that look as per project basis?
Well, I do want to figure out, what we're doing. What is the project? Tron had a very electronic feel, obviously, to the story. So I didn't mind being, electronic on that version, even though the original was shot film, but through a very, oh my God. If you see the making of that, that's pretty intense how they made that movie and committed to those looks. But we had the luxury of shooting. We were shooting in native 3-dimensional. So that definitely had a consideration for real 3D. And at that time, I don't think 3D was that up to par. There's definitely perspective lines that I thought you couldn't do in stages as far as 3-dimensional. I had different thoughts about 3D, about shallow depth of field. Everyone was reading the book and says you must have infinite depth of field, and I agree to a point, but I disagree to another point. I believe that if your eye is engaged in an actor, I feel that it's more immersive if the background's just a little bit soft and you're engaged specifically on that actor. So I think there's story point to depth of field, and I believe that in storytelling, even today, I think there's times when you do want larger depth of field for a story point, and then you really, at a point, it's really dramatic to shallow it up for, an intimate scene or whatever you feel like is a story. So for me, gear-wise, it's all about like how I feel I want to tell the story.
Right. Yeah. So Tron being 3D, that is interesting because, like you said, most common practices at the time was that with 3D work, you need to have a very great depth of field, and you don't want to have necessarily a shadow. So was that a challenge, sort of convincing everyone that that's the way you thought you should proceed with this?
No, it's like everything else. I don't surprise everybody. I go like, hey, we're shallow now. I do tests. I do camera tests, and you'll see some of the ridiculous ones I've done. That I think some pictures have been taken. And I just feel like when we're shooting, we know what we're feeling. I'm not going to surprise everyone and go shallow depth of field. I just say, I'll just do a close up. For instance, there's one of Jeff Bridges. He's sitting on the thing, and it's super shallow. It's 1/4 inch depth of field, and it's totally appropriate for that moment. And also, we were also dealing with other impracticalities just to kind of let me to need light as well. The suits were only so bright, and they were all electrified suits. So I wanted to get as much light off them as possible. So I also used those suits also in some scenes actually light each other. There's a couple scenes I think you might have, I think that might be in the play as well. That shows kind of how they light each other.
You mean one of the images that you sent us?
Might be initially starts with a blue screen background, and then it kind of it tracks along to where they're in a hallway. You may not need to do the beginning of it. You could probably just fast forward a little bit through this, and I'll just show you. Like this is kind of the raw of the suits being kind of lit, but this is where I was talking to the actors. I say they initially had their hands, across their shoulders. I said I really need to use the light to light each other. So right now the suits are definitely lighting Olivia Wilde and Garrett Hedlund too. So it's I didn't know another place to put a light that felt realistically. I don't think it'd be a nice 3/4 back anywhere. It'd be in shot. It'd feel wrong and disconnected. So I think this is the way it was in camera. And of course, every now and I think this clip shows the suit going off, which we had to kind of fix or cut between. Anyway.
Oh, the EL wires in the suit, you mean?
The EL wires, and they, Garrett, he's, when he was doing some action scenes, he sweat a lot, and he was constantly cursing at the screens, getting electrocuted half the time. There was a lot of voltage in there for him. Anyway,
that's great. And then you also sent us a clip also with. I believe he's your gaffer playing with LED lighting, and maybe that was kind of the early onset of really high-end LED lighting for your feature films too, as well, right?
Yeah, there's a definite point in the story where he holds up the disc into the air, and he sends it off, and that's the iconic iconic imagery of the first one, and I kind of wanted to have an iconic imagery of the second one, and I definitely wanted to make this 30-foot tall by 6-foot wide LED wall that had motion in it that kind of was giving the feeling of the disc porthole. So I did make this was just a temp size one, but for the shoot day but this is what I was showing, what I wanted to build. And Joe Kosinski was all excited about doing this in camera, so I built I think it was 8-foot wide by 50-foot tall version of that with just media flowing around for interactive light. And then I used them for elevators Tron elevators go very fast down and up. So there's definitely, I use those for interactive lighting. For disc games as well, for when discs are flying around actors, I would put like panels across and have the light of the disc kind of surround the actors. I just felt it was much more immersive to have the technology the lighting kind of flow around the actors. This felt more, I try to make it as real as possible. Like in Tron, we built that one room that I think you showed a picture of earlier on. And we just love that, the idea is they're touching it, it's real. Obviously there's background extensions and, Tron bikes don't work that fast. And so there's a couple things that we had to do,
Right. Yeah, I think those were the early photos we have on the screen of the kind of the white floor and sort of you see the fading distance.
That's a real set. That's beautiful, I think. All those glass panels were unfortunately different colors, which, it was just, I don't know why they came, and it was a big torture to get it as close as it is right now, which I still think I would fix it. But that's just me.
Oh, you mean the actual glass material itself came from the factory?
All the glasses were different colors. They were green, magenta. I don't know what happened, but they were all like, some were stacked with plus screen, some were stacked with minus screen and different levels. And they're just, we just tagged each one, and it was like a week getting that floor balance to be the right thing. And it was built 9 feet up in the air, so I could underlight it. And also I wanted cues to bring the whole thing on as well. So anyway, a lot of work.
So you actually did gel individual glass sheets. They're probably, 2 feet by 2 feet, it looks like, if not bigger.
Each section was sectioned off, so the lights that were lighting had their own little package specific to the corrections that needed to be done.
That's really
anyway.
Cool.
That's more of a boring conversation about underlighting glass, But it was a little bit Joe's kind of, he's wearing his Kubrick Schmerbrick T-shirt, on that day.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting look. Thank you for that insight. Sorry, was that Ian coming with a question? I thought I heard his voice.
No, we're all good. I'll entertain a question anytime you're ready, guys.
Yeah, if you had anything specifically about, since we're talking about Tron, if there's a Tron Legacy specific question, be happy to hear that now. Again, that may have just been some feedback in my earpiece here.
Nothing for Tron specifically at this time. Thank you.
Okay. But yeah, as a reminder, please go ahead and ask those questions, and we'll have Ian interrupt us when we get started talking. We wanted to briefly also talk. Of course, we can't talk to Claudio Miranda and not talk about when you won the Academy Award for Life of Pi. So that was an interesting project because, not strictly speaking, but much of the film was shot in a water tank, or at least in body of water. So it's not just as simple as filling a pool or flooding a parking lot full of water, but you actually had to build a dedicated tank for this, correct?
Yes, we built a dedicated tank, and it had to satisfy our lighting needs for the movie. It had to, sunset to sunrise. It had to be large enough volume that I felt like I could put a sun which was a large sun. I think it was, I think we had 9 M18s on it on a crane rig to throw light across this water, and we had. The overhead, we had a system of rags that we could block out the sun or use real sun. The rags were 3 of them that I think were 150 by, what were they? It was 3 foot long, the whole tank that we covered. And I think it was 150 feet. I feel like it was more than that. Anyway, it was about 150 feet. And then we were able to put blacks, full grid, quarter grid, and sometimes I just changed the way I want the lighting. Like if I wanted a little bit more softer glow from the back, I'd black up some of the ones near camera, and I put full grid in the back, and it kind of gave us this sunset feel or this past sunlight feel. So you could see kind of how we were working. We had a 3D rig on a spider cam that's kind of in the pictures. There's a lot of science kind of to this tank. It was wave engineers kind of build this tank. There's some of these tripods that stop the backwash of water so the waves can kind of feel more oceanic. You could see there's white rags that I could pull to give a little bit more fill, or black, depending if I want more contrast. Yeah, that was the tank work. I mean, we also had some other kind of interesting shots on there as well, which I thought was, we had this pool in India. That was this scene where it was a festival of some sorts. I don't know why I'm actually forgetting what it was for. But Aang wanted to fill it with candles. So I thought it was very interesting to have on my list of orders for the gaffer and for the crew, well, actually more for the production designer, for like 120,000 candles, which was quite a beautiful thing, seeing 2 people light them, and I was lighting them, the producers were lighting them. It was a really magical day. My gaffer you could see on the top picture, there was a little light that was kind of there because I was maybe worried the candles were there, but in the end, I just kind of kept on turning them off and just letting the candles really just light the scene, all the candles that we had. It was a pretty beautiful scene. There's also the picture. That's a tank picture too, which is kind of like the book cover, and that was kind of that's what our real tank looked like, and the lighting of that tank, which I thought the sun felt really believable. I think it works really well.
So you can literally say 120,000 foot candles or whatever the units of.
Yeah, there's 120,000 candles per foot. What I kind of was calculating out. So anyway.
That's interesting. And then as far as the tank build, you also sent us an image of the construction, and then you put, based on the time of the year, of course, the shadow and the Earth's rotation and everything would affect that. So can you get into this image a little bit too? Because I thought this was pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it actually plays, but also, well, I think you could hit play on this. It just actually showed, I wanted the doors to open from the tank, so I built these giant doors that could open, and it was facing the sunset, basically facing west. So at a certain time of day, I would use the real sunset to, because I just try to use as much real light as possible. For me, it's always the best. So I devised these doors to open, and for one scene, we opened them up, and obviously, scenes when you get into a big scene, they take more than a couple hours to shoot. So on those scenes where I had to maintain sunset, for those I had to use fake sun.
Hey, Jeff, we have a question.
Sorry, sure, go ahead, please.
This is in regards to the conversation we're having about the technical challenges. Mauricio Vidal's asking, in projects like Oblivion, Life of Pi, or Benjamin Button, all those have technical innovations involved. How do you manage your time and make artistic and technical decisions? Do you determine the visual language and style of the film first and then technical developments to be made? And what happens when technical developments take longer than expected?
Well, I mean, for Oblivion, that might be kind of a later conversation. I don't know if you want to go in. Do you want to go into that now, Jeff? Or
well, I know we want to speak about Oblivion definitely in some detail, but there was also a point about the question about Life of Pi and other technical points too. So do you want to address at least those challenges first?
Well, I mean, we could talk about like how I got the job, in a way. I mean, I got the job because Ang Lee wanted to shoot digital. Ang Lee wanted to shoot in 3D. So he liked the way Benjamin Buttons looked, and he liked the three-dimensional of Tron. So that was kind of those two movies kind of got me in the door. And when I met Ang, I do usually really terrible in interviews. I don't know what it is. I usually, in the beginning I didn't get jobs, but now they seem to be a little bit more better. But in the beginning and I thought for sure, when I walked away from that job, I thought for sure I lost it. Then they gave me a call and says, Ang wants to meet you on stage. So I went on the stage and they had some 3D, and Ang's going like, this 3D just feels kind of uncomfortable or backwards. And I just went up to the cameras and just kind of set up the scene, and literally like 5 minutes, I just showed him like a better version of it. And I kind of had to go for another meeting for something else, and then I got a call that I had the job, just after that, so I was like, wow, I finally got a job, like after an interview,
I mean, and that's actually probably a good segue we might as well talk about Oblivion, because I think one of my favorite movies, by the way, but I think the beauty of it, and this is, folks may know this already, but I think the beauty of it is when they're in the, what do they call it, the Sky
Tower, yeah.
Thank you, Sky Tower, that all of the lighting within that tower is actually essentially practical, because it's coming from front projection. And I think you said probably a dozen, or maybe even more, like 24 projectors in a stitched gigantic wall. Mm-hmm. And that would provide a lot of the lighting for that. So can you talk a little bit about that process, and even just where the genesis of that project, how did that come about, or that idea rather, using the Sky Tower lighting?
I mean, for me, Joe and I, after Tron, we did Tron together. We always imagined like a world that had, maybe LED at the time. But when we looked at the sets were so big, and at the time LED had this terrible off angle. Things get very magenta when you get to the sides. I mean, it's still present to this day, but screens has progressed a lot farther, which makes it much easier to use the LED technology. For me, I worked in some modeling programs to figure out the screens and if this would work, and I kind of pre-visualized lighting from using 3D to see how it would, from the camera angles. Also, I had to kind of place the set. So we had to place the set. I think it kind of worked out from our angles that it had to be 9 feet off the ground. So I didn't see the ceiling or the floor, and I had to move in the screen enough where I wouldn't see the floor or the grid at that point. So it was all carefully mapped. What you kind of see in these images right now is projection overlap. So you can see a lot of projections are kind of mounted, vertically, and there's a 4 that were mounted horizontally that covered the space. I think in the end we had a lot more projectors, but we had a single piece of cloth brought in, I think, from Germany that was 45 feet tall by 500. And it was a continuous piece of fabric that wrapped the whole set. And, you know, I did get a lot of, let's say production wasn't, let's say, how can I say this without getting in too much trouble? But they weren't totally on board. They were, you know, I got a quote was saying, I think this plays too, if you want to see it. This is just the lighting thing. This should actually play, this clip. This is just, I was just showing me how it, you know, where to place the sun. How does it look? Does it look far? You know, the worst thing is when I see a movie and the sun looks like it does a V. It doesn't look like lines are parallel. So I wanted to make sure the sun was deep enough where I wouldn't see, where the lines would not be parallel. So this was a little bit of some testing I've done. This is just a play. This is a little bit fancier version of just kind of the methodology. But they were really into, you know, shooting at blue screen, and it was a big convince to kind of convince them that to build this kind of projection model. They didn't. We did some tests, and we did 2 projectors on a tiny set, and we said, wow, this is really has some potential. And but they still weren't buying it. I mean, I really had to kind of stick my neck out there and Joe backed me up on this too, which was kind of great. That no, we're committing to this. And I think we gave the guy, I think it was like a 2-week build, and I gave him an extra pad, and they ate through the pad, and we were still fixing things on the shoot day. It was one of the moments, I think, in my career, which I think was the biggest, because it was so many people kind of not supporting it, that I had the most, I don't know, euphoric kind of, yeah, you know, when it all worked, and worked beyond our wildest thoughts. We thought it was only going to be good for medium shots, but we used it for wide shots. We lit completely with it. I mean, every now and then I would put a little bounce somewhere in the frame if I needed to, but the shot you're seeing now is just all projection, no other augmented lighting. You know, I had to argue that I said, listen, all the lights that I'd light the blue screen of, I'm not going to have it. I'm going to have a really small lighting package. It's going to be, the lighting package will be nothing, you know. And I had to kind of commit to that. So like one of your little battles and fights to kind of make this happen. And you know, and it was also because we wanted all the surface to be chrome and glass, and you know, that kind of that's what the space kind of needed. It needed to be made with all these high-tech materials, and if all those surfaces would be made out of dulled gray, and then they would have to add reflections in, and it'd be all synthetic, it would, I think it'd be terrible. And I turned it blue for the producers. Just threw video blue on the whole thing, and the whole set disappeared. Yeah, so it was a good win, that one. That looked great. I'm pretty proud of that day. That was amazing set.
Yeah, and it's obviously it's a beautiful look that you've created as well, and that was essentially all footage that you guys went out to some mountains in Hawaii, I believe, right? And you shot some practicals and then just reprojected them with the stitched.
Yeah, we sent a camera crew out there, and we wanted them to get above the clouds, so they see the clouds and they're just running up. I think it was Jonas Stedman when was my AC, and they were just hoofing it up, you know, the mountains at these high altitudes to get the perfect plates of the sky that we put on the projection. I mean, obviously in the story there's a blown up moon, so they have to, you know, they add that to our plates as well.
Right. And of course, there's also a really classic scene where Tom Cruise's character is rappelling into this sort of mountain cavern, right? And that's something that.
Right.
And
yeah.
I think we have a couple images of that too.
Yeah, we did. There were
And
some lighting references that I wanted to do. I really wanted the light to feel like it came from the hole and it kind of radiated out from that point. And then as Tom gets kind of, when he gets lower, boomed down into the environment, I really wanted to be his flashlight they had on the end of the gun, along with some grips holding whites up, and kind of chasing him around a little bit, and just have little spots of white where he can kind of hit every now and then. That would be his only return. So this was kind of a previs model. I just roughed in a little bit of a lighting thing, how I wanted it to feel, and then I think if the next clip on this one just shows kind of what reality was.
Right. So this is previs, what we're looking at right now, and then you have
kind of just a very rough previs, and then I think I just play this one, and this is kind of the our lighting test reality. This was kind of how it.
So this was the end result.
This was the end result. And what I did on that one, because we didn't have enough ceiling room, we only had 8 feet. What I built is a giant 8 by 12 polished, like a piece of silver, and I had 3 18Ks, 50 feet at the back wall, aiming at the top, bouncing into it, so it gave it a more collimated look, so it didn't feel sourcey. So it gave it a better shaft, just to throw that kind of light from 8 feet, especially if I have to hang it, then the light's hanging down 4 feet away from the ceiling. That's a little bit of a mess. So I just think that would look fake. So that's why we just came out with this giant silver bounce.
So was that the main source? I'm sorry if you said that already.
That was the main source. Well, along with Tom's flashlight on his gun when we got into the scene, when he crossed the bridge and went to the other side, the darker side of the set.
Yeah, I think we actually have a still of that. So when this clip finishes, we'll see the actual set of him rappelling in with the flashlight, like you said, lighting up this. I think it was a library, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's the New York Library.
Right.
It's supposed to be the destruction of the. But you can see, like in the very back, it gets pretty bleak. You could probably go to the next frame. I think this is just long enough there. Yeah, I think these are some stills that were taken.
Right. So obviously some great atmosphere coming from that, like you said, essentially 2 light sources.
Correct. And I do want his gun to be, prominent light in this as well. So we did, test different lights for the guns, and we've, found one that would work within the confines of the flashlight.
Right. Cool. And then, I think your next project after that was probably Tomorrowland, which was for those that don't know, the first Dolby Cinema release. So HDR release, and I think these days, maybe a lot of us take HDR for granted because it's become really easy and accessible, where a lot of TVs support it. Your latest phones and tablets all support HDR, but you were, again, instrumental in sort of paving the way for the HDR landscape. So what was it like when you got the call for Tomorrowland and they said, we want to shoot this in HDR? Or maybe I should back up and ask a question. Did they begin thinking they wanted to finish this in HDR in Dolby Cinema, or did that come later?
It came later. It came a little after the fact. You know what I mean? So it wasn't really planned for HDR. There was some issues with certain scenes in HDR that became problematic. I mean, anytime you have, because we live in a 24 frame kind of world in there, anytime you have high strobing with high brights and whites becomes a little bit problematic. So we had to kind of do a special grade for that one just to kind of calm that down, because it just becomes a little bit too much. So a lot of people like to, which is a problematic in the industry, I think sometimes movies or some television shows are just kind of given a LUT to kind of convert one way or the other direction. But I do believe that there has to be a thought process to the way you grade HDR, and a thought process to how you grade the 14-foot Lambert Cinema version, and the process of how you just do regular home video release, whether it's HDR or not. I just think there has to be there's not a one-button turnkey that just kind of goes, a device that kind of makes it. I mean, they sell them. I just think there's a story point. I mean, in Tomorrowland, to make the sun 100% or make the whites 100% is just painful. You don't want to live in a world that does that. But where there's an explosion or, in what am I just drawing a blank on the name of the film? But on Close Encounters, that big bright white screen, you could use that for a big bass drum, which would be, I think that'd be fantastic. So there's a place to use all that range you do have, but I just don't think now that you have whites at this, incredible brightness, I just don't think that's where white should live 100% of the time. And I think it has to be done with people with taste.
Jeff, I have a question in regards to that.
Sure, go ahead.
Maddox Upshaw is asking Claudio if he uses a LUT for exposure, or do you rely to do that in post? In other words, how reliant are you on a LUT to judge exposure on set? Versus setting everything in terms of luminance and color in post?
I know I'll be there in the DI, so I just make sure that I'm capturing the dynamic range of the camera, from sun as much as, and putting my exposure where I want it. I mean, I look at waveforms. I don't really do a bunch of LUTs on a film. Pretty much I have one LUT for the whole show. I just change if I want it warmer, I might just do a color temperature shift, or I just, change how I light, to make it look right for the movie. But for me, I've seen a lot of people do it where they have all these different LUTs. I'd rather not. I may sit with the DIT after, and I say grab some specific frames for the editorial, and I'll go and I'll make a specific look for that scene, and then that'll be applied to the dailies going forward from there. But nothing beats. I know I'm going to be in DI like I was yesterday on my latest movie, and I'm going to be there in the room, and we're going to talk about color, warmth, contrast. We're doing the 14-foot Lambert version now. I'm sure we'll be doing an HDR pass after the fact. Dolby, and then there's IMAX version. Then there's and then there's even some other formats that are coming out that I'm not sure if I could talk about.
And a related question, Richard Harling is asking, given the breadth of possibilities available in post-production, to what extent do you rely on capturing the look in camera, and how does that add to the quality of the actor's performance, your photography, and to the audience experience?
I try to get it on set as much as possible. I try to really, if I'm really wanting warm light to come through the windows, I put warm light coming through the windows. There's things that are just difficult to kind of chase down in DI. Like if there's an offset between warmth and cool, the sky is cool and you have warm light coming in, you want to light with that offset. In Pi, there's a big warm light that's coming across the water for the scene, but it's also helped by a little bit of this cool fill light that I surrounded everything with as well. Like it just grounds the warmth for me a little bit more, feels more like sunset. So for me, I get as close as I can to on set, and we just push it even farther in DI. And it also helps when you see editorial's going to change where placements of scenes are sometimes. Sometimes things get just moved around. So say in a script you're going in a certain order, and this little section gets moved kind of in the middle, that may base your color temperature through line a little bit. So things sometimes do change in editorial as well. So there's a little bit of a mixed bag there.
Great, thank you for that. Now, I do definitely want to speak to you about HDR, like we talked about, and maybe some of your monitoring practices. But before we get to that, we have to talk about how you got to choosing the camera for the particular project. So I know at some point you were running camera tests and you had multiple cameras, probably one of every make on a vehicle rig.
All right.
So can you talk a little bit about that and sort of the process behind that and what the what your findings were? I mean, again, I think you probably put together the entire camera suite from a rental house in
I
front
mean,
of you.
it's usually what I do. I try to like test all cameras, against each other that I think are, applicable. And I put those all out. I think there's a picture of me. This silly test was. I got tired of you setting each camera up, and then you shooting them, and then the last camera has the best light because it's sunset and looks amazing, and then you go, wow, that looks amazing. That last camera you shot, and I go, yeah, of course, it was the end of the day, and so I didn't want to have any of that nonsense. I wanted all cameras rolling at the same time. I wanted them rolling on Upper Grand in Los Angeles in the daytime. I want to do Upper Grand at nighttime. And I've done this run. It's like a run I do since Benjamin Buttons. So I could go back in my camera log and kind of even put other cameras in that situation too. But I really wanted this test to be projected on a big giant 60-foot screen and really just kind of look at all the cameras and then take the labels off them and really just pick, what is good for this movie. And this movie also had some limitations. There was a scene in the movie, and I know I needed a camera that had high sensitivity. And, in the digital market, that's still it still trumps kind of everything right now. There was a space shuttle, and I knew if I shot that on film, I'd have to put, the platform is 500 foot tall. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but it seems like it's 500 foot tall. And there was no condor to get above to make a moonlight back, to make this kind of a moonlight feel. So my choice would be have ground lights on the ground, backlighting. Well, that would have given a heroic feeling that I didn't want for that movie. It wants to be a tower that's being taken apart. So storyline wise, I really wanted to use the practicals that were on. In fact, I turned off 75% of them, and it felt like I could even turn off another. I felt like I only needed 5% on there. I feel like there's still way too many lights on there. But I felt like that told the story. And so we picked cameras a little bit based on that as well.
And I think we have a shot of the actual tower you're referencing, right? This image here that's up on the screen.
No. It's actually a real location. This was just
sorry.
That was they were supposed to be in this environment that I wanted to. It's a real interactive environment. So I wanted to surround them in an environment that was swirling around with the media that they were supposed to be watching. So the editors came up with an edit, and I put that edit on the screen, and that was their environment they were in. Of course, things changed that too.
Right. And then back to those shots of the camera test. You had obviously film cameras. You had a lot of digital cinema cameras, and ultimately we know that the project went with a Sony f/65s. So, and
right.
Was that to some of the findings? I'm sure, or were there any sort of thoughts behind that?
It was a lot to do with low light, that I needed for the movie. And that Tomorrowland had a futuristic look on one hand. And, Brad really wanted to do film. In fact, there was a bunch of cameras. There was thought about doing digital for Tomorrowland, but it just didn't work. I didn't, and then there was multiple units going, and then it was like, how do we, it just became, the camera package was like this Excel sheet that was driving me nuts. And I just said, like, listen, I just did some scenes in both, and I was able to kind of recreate it. I mean, IMAX was 15 perf, pretty amazing, I gotta say. But practicality of that, it was not. I mean, seeing IMAX shot at night and underexposed 3 stops was kind of interesting. Seeing giant grain, but devoid of color, because it was so underexposed. It was an interesting look. I mean, I don't know, but the night was it was maybe a different movie for that kind of look.
And then moving back to what we were talking about earlier with HDR. So once you knew it was an HDR project, did that change anything about how you exposed or how you monitored on set, or did you kind of keep your sort of best practices from previous projects you worked on?
You may avoid certain types of situations, general for HDR, any sort of high contrast panning. You may just want to think about that a little bit, those are kind of the big ones for me. Just like, as far as, if you know something's going to go HDR, or what the HDR's problems are, or if it is a problem, like how am I going to go about fixing it? Whether it's lowering the contrast of that specifically area, or lowering the brightness of the shot, or I don't know, experiment some more about trying to figure out how to fix that, in HDR, because you just don't want it to be, because strobing if it's on a phone, it's probably not a big deal, but if it's on a big screen, it is a big deal. So that's also your kind of, what your target resolution is, your target audience viewing experience it's also a little bit different.
Right, and you mentioned that earlier, which is why, generally speaking, you'll always go in for a HDR pass and then a 14-foot Lambert pass and then the home cinema release.
I mean, even Life of Pi came up with an HDR pass, and 3 years after the fact, and I went in for a special grade for that one. So, I'll try to be there as much as I can.
Yeah, I was about to ask you that. So do you try to always go back to, if they were to do that, or if they were to remaster something, or you always try to be available for that? Or
I always try to be available and be invited, So I try to work around my schedule, and I'll go there at midnight if I need to wherever it is to be part of that. And just, sometimes even like there was an upscaling too that I saw, like there were some issues on. So you can call that, like if things just feel synthetic, And that's for me is lighting as well. If lighting starts to feel artificial or synthetic, I start over, and I've been on set and I go like, man, sometimes this plan is not good right now. We need to rethink about this, and then, come up with a solution, and hopefully, you have a good crew, which we did, and then we can go from there. Why is? Oh, sorry about that, guys. My phone should not be dinging. I have it off. Oh. Oh, anyway.
Is there an example of an instance where you had to basically start over from scratch that you can speak to, that, you're like you just mentioned, you looked at a lighting setup, you go, nope, this isn't going to work for our needs?
Most things work, but yes, let me think of one. Well, for instance, I mean, like a little bit playing chicken on Life of Pi with all those candles, and I had the gaffer add all those lights out there, and it just started feeling so phony. It started feeling like had all these little special lights out there, and I thought all those special lights were so unspecial to me. I just rather just have what just looked best was just the candle glow, and we did have them out there, but and a couple of them we couldn't get in time. So I mean, in DI, I'm like, trying to darken them down a little bit, and try to make them like not as obvious as they kind of were, because you're just you're not, some of the sets you can't pre-light the day before. You're kind of in there at night, and you're kind of looking at it in the context of all these candles, and how much light am I really getting off these candles, and those are a little bit of kind of unknowns, and you kind of get on their day and you go like, let me just be a little scared and add these dumb lights, and it just was a stupid idea. So I mean, not dumb, it's just better to turn it off, to have it than turn it off, than the other way around, right? I guess.
Right.
Jeff, we have a couple of questions regarding lighting.
Sure, please.
Alex Wolver would like to ask, I would love to learn how you break down a scene. Do you start with a wide shot and then go tight? Do you relight faces as you go for the tights, or leave it as it was in the wide? And what is an overall approach, and how do you keep on schedule when working with a meticulous director like Fincher?
I personally like blocking and getting the wide shot done and figuring out where everyone's going to go. I like doing that because it kind of helps a little bit with lighting. And then when we get into close-ups, then if someone needs a little cosmetic help or just a little bit of bounce, then we just kind of, we're augmenting from that point of view, And also for Fincher, he likes kind of figuring it out a little bit in the wide shot. My experience, I haven't worked with him in a while, so Eric Messerschmidt probably is a better person to ask Fincher about that. But I do feel that makes sense. Then and even Joe, we kind of figure out the blocking of the wide shot, and then we figure out, it just helps us understand the scene sometimes a little bit more if we're struggling with a little something, and then we kind of come in for tight close-ups. I also try to figure out what the drama is of the scene. There's a... Oh, I can't talk about that movie. There's a scene I want to say, but I can't talk about it. Wow. All right. Anyway, there's a scene that you're playing dark and it's night, and you want to feel like this is going to work. Like, is this scene going to play off his device? And I just want to know if it will play off his device, and without any other supplemental lighting, like a street light coming from outside or anything. So we just have, a background. And so I had a feeling like I may want to add something, but it was just so beautiful to play in the silhouette. And just, when he brings up his phone device, the light from there. Yeah, usually I kind of back up to what's right, I think, I'm trying to figure out what I did that was really terribly wrong. I'm sure there's many of times I do that. Can't think of it.
Related to this, Patton Whitehead is asking, I'm going to sort of interpret his question a little bit, because the direct question is, how can you get a dark, mushy image while upholding image integrity? I think also that part of that conversation is, when do you know with a specific camera sensor how much light you can give it before your dark images start to fall apart and you don't have room to work with it in post?
Oh, I see. I do a lot of testing, and I have a big monitor on set. I've visited some sets, and I've seen some people light with these little tiny monitors, and I find that depending on a big scene, large scene, or for a big giant movie, I find that kind of well, I don't know. I found out how do you know? But I have on set, I have an X300, and I use that, and I can see instantly in the toe end when it starts falling apart. So if I start seeing it falling apart, it is falling apart. So I start bringing out lights to help that situation or I take the Sony Venice you could take to 2500 ASA. That seems to work pretty good.
Just so we're clear on that one end, when you're working with the X300, you're working in an SDR environment?
No, I work in standard, yeah.
Okay. And is that with a LUT applied, or are you looking at the log feed out of the camera and evaluating with monitors or with waveforms?
I have a log feed that I can evaluate, but that's a terrible thing to light to. So I don't light to it. I light to it it's a slightly modified 709 feed.
Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for those questions. Those are great. Moving ahead a little bit, because obviously do want to get to Top Gun at some point today too. But I know for Only the Brave, I think this is fascinating for me when you were testing, because for those that haven't seen it, of course, it's about the wildfires in California. And there was fire, of course, being, I'm sure, a lighting element, but also a character in the movie too. So you did some pretty thorough testing of fire rigs and apparatus with your team. So can you talk a little bit about that process and sort of what you guys were looking for when you were essentially lighting up the desert and fire?
Right. Fire was a big, character, obviously, in that movie. And not all cameras can capture the highlight roll-off. This was just kind of a fire test. It wasn't really done with the proper camera, and this is also very bitty, but what I'm looking for in the fire characteristics for a camera is just how the highlight roll-off is. So some cameras are really great, at 0 to 60 or 0 to 70, but the highlights get chiclety, or they get just, I don't know, they feel unnatural. So I'll test all cameras against and see how that highlight roll-off is. Knowing that this is a giant character of the movie. And so here's us testing propane. We're mixing some diesel in here to see how rich the black smoke is. So we're just kind of looking at this footage right now just to kind of see That's a, I think it's a 30-foot wall right now. And on the day we had, I think we had 6 of those, along with trees that we would set also. There's a little tree stand that also put out flames as well. I think some days we were burning, 3,000 gallons of propane a day with some diesel. Not so environmentally friendly. Yeah.
Right. And then, so obviously low light was probably not a challenge. So as far as ASA and whatnot for that, you were probably
It's the
sticking with
highlight that's a challenge for some cameras that I found, and I did put, not quite, I put a fire for that test. I specifically put a bunch of different fires across, and I put 6 cameras across. Oh, no, not 6, 4 cameras across. And I just tested all of them against each other. And some cameras sung, some cameras didn't. And we just kind of chose the ones that would suit the whole movie for us.
And then I guess your sort of next project after Only the Brave wasn't necessarily feature film, but this is when you actually went to Japan and you were instrumental in helping Sony come up with the Venice camera.
Right. Right.
So you went there, and what is it like to be basically designing the camera of your dreams? Like, what was that trip like?
Oh, Sony was really interested in listening to me on a design level for the Venice. So I was really glad to have their ear on this, which I think was just, and they were. I didn't think they would listen, but they'd listen, and the end. I was kind of responsible. I wanted all the NDs to be in the camera, so I thought, wouldn't this be great to be able to judge the depth of field on the fly? Because as I said before, I feel like depth of field is a character. So if I could slide back and maybe get that 2-shot just in, or get it more in, or look at the depth of field as I'm playing with a shot, rather than having ACs flying in or going in big giant leaps. I didn't. So I like the idea that I can go in one-stop increments and really fine-tune as an idea, and have them all the way go up to N2.4. And so I thought that was really important. And also I wanted to have controls on my side, so that little window we kind of talked about on my side, so I can change the NDs as I'm looking at it, rather than go to the other side and do that. I said, I'm just as important as well. I want to ding dongs. I want to be able just to kind of go there and roll it myself. So I was instrumental on that decision. And the Rialto mode kind of came across another need a little bit after the fact, is that I wanted to get it in the F1 of the shot over. But it turns out when they built this device, there was a small little sensor on the end of this 9-foot rope that allowed us to put the sensor anywhere we wanted to. So it was, we go like, this was initially made for the jet, but this could be really useful for, on commercials I've used it for handheld. I've used it to stick on the end of a pole. Actually, this is actually in the movie, so I could talk about it. I think there's a motorcycle shot with Tom on it, and you just put the light camera out there. It's not a big giant camera at the end of his motorcycle. So that really that was really instrumental for all that stuff. So
and you mentioned earlier already the dual native ISO, the fact that you have a 2500 ISO mode too, and this short called The Dig that you filmed really illustrates some of that low light.
Yeah, I wasn't there yet. 25 wasn't, and our cameras were so new on the Dig. 2500 wasn't around. The ASA really wasn't totally around yet, but we did shoot it in the as wide open as I can. We shot with master anamorphics with front and back flare elements in them. But now I can make a better Dig with 2500. It was those cameras were so new at the time. They were not. They had little computers on them just to kind of get them to kind of run. They were really kind of mostly there. But the sensor and color science was all kind of there. But And I think I'm pretty proud of the way the dig looks. I think it looks great. I think, I approached Sony that I felt like we really need to have, like a series director direct like a series piece, and to show off the capabilities of this camera. So we me and Joe kind of came together and made this the dig.
Yeah, we have a couple of photos of that as well for those that haven't seen it. There's obviously some daytime stuff, which of course is really challenging, especially when shooting in a desert inside a car. Right. And then there's also some of the scenes where they're in the office building at night when they break into the offices. And what I didn't realize was that your cameras were so early in the build that they were before the 2500 ASA mode. But you could have fooled me because it's so clean. The way those dark, really sort of dark scenes looked, and lit with what seemed like the practicals on the computer screen, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then obviously a lot of what you learned and what sort of advice you gave Sony on building it, translated to Top Gun. I think most of us have probably already seen the behind the scenes. Obviously you should watch a trailer if you haven't, because that's a lot of energy. But there's a fantastic behind the scenes too that maybe we can roll up a short part of right now, that shows some of the work that you did to put the cameras inside these fighter jets, filming the cast and crew. So we can roll that right now. I love that shot where his hair gets just blown away from the...
We're working with a brand new camera system.
Yeah, so there we see some of the Venuses and Rialtos inside. So how many cameras did you have total inside the cockpit?
We had 6.
Oh yeah, so there's a 6 shots. And that was for coverage reasons, right? To get all the angles that you needed?
Right, correct. We have 4 looking back and 2 front.
Sure, jet fuel. And that's cool, you get the vapor trails coming up the wing.
Yeah, and that was the best thing we ever saw, like vapors coming off. I thought that was so great to get that in camera. This whole job was like a big challenge to we really wanted to get it all in camera, all the aerials, and just, that was our goal. How do we get these cameras in the jet? I had ideas about cameras and how we can get them all in, and just convincing the Navy and kind of planning and doing some prep with some other jets to kind of show what my ideas are and to get that approved through the Navy. And I really this is a thing, you have to, when you're dealing with potentially another department like the Navy or someone that's not quite, movie industry, you really want to give yourself a lot of leeway time. So in the beginning, when I first got the job, I said, let me talk to the Navy, let me get my contacts up. Let me figure out how to get in there. Let me figure out, like, early on, almost before I'm even hired, like, how do I, I know it's out there, but what will you allow me to do, and, and it took a lot of, they told me in the beginning, says, you'll never get 6 cameras in there. They said, you'll never get 6 cameras. And then I said, well, let me try, So I sat there by the jets as we're putting them in. And I kept on saying, what is that part for? I said, no, that's a video camera. I said, for looking at our missile, whatever it is. And I go like, well, you don't need that, right? I got my cameras. I think, can I just take that spot? And it says, yeah, sure, you don't need it. So I just kept on finding things they didn't, obviously everything for safety for them flying. And I just kept on questioning them, just because you got to know, because I got to know right in the beginning, like, no way you might get 2 cameras in there. For me I feel like me being a little bit persistent, I feel like I got my way a little bit there, just to be like a little bit just, it's okay to keep on questioning or find the right person. There was a shot, I think in the beginning, Tom, there's a very famous, I think, dialogue about turning the boat for the sun. And it became kind of a big deal. And, everyone I was talking to, I said, I'd love to be sun to be heading, like the nose heading to like 4 o'clock. And I said, can we just, and everyone was saying, no, you can't do that. And I was kind of walking down the hallway and I just passed someone. He says, well, how's your day going? I said, man, I just really wish I could have got the sun like at the right angle. It would have made the shot just so much better. And he goes like, well, that's not a problem. our ship has 23 years of fuel. We could go anywhere you want. We can make our own wind. And I go like, and then I just said, well, he says, what do you need? And I go, well, I'd love to have the sun, at 4 o'clock at about 6, heading 4 o'clock, about 6 o'clock. And I was almost in tears. Like the whole boat started moving over. It was like perfect. The sun was perfect. And then from then on, I had this carte blanche of I could just turn this aircraft carrier wherever I want for the sun. And I just called him my best gaffer I've ever had. It was awesome. That is something, man. It was just like when you just could turn your whole world around and just have everything lined up perfectly. I do some coverage of one shots. I said, yeah. And then he'd be right next to me. From then on, he was my right-hand person. And I said, okay, we're going to the other side. Let's flip the sun. And boat would turn. And it was amazing. Yeah, really good.
Does he have to become a union member
Good
now?
moments. Huh?
I was making a joke that he has to become a union member now because.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know, man. It was awesome. That was great. Really great. Really exciting.
Now, a lot of the stuff too with this, and what we started seeing a little bit, there's, you have coverage. So you have the cameras in the cockpit for all the coverage that you need. Then you also have ground, based crews like we saw also, and also air-based crews too. And you touched upon it a little bit briefly about.
And we also have external mounts.
Oh, so, on the jets themselves. Right?
On the jets themselves. So there's external mounts on the jets. We had ground-based teams on mountains, various mountains capturing runs. We had the CineJet, which was capturing a lot of footage. We had some days that's the CineJet.
Jeff, I have a question.
Sure.
There's a couple of grips who are curious about the rig in the cockpit, specifically the 6-camera. They wanted to ask, were there any special considerations that had to be made to mounting them in there, considering vibration, shake being introduced to the cameras from vibrations of the fuselage, any of that, and also keeping aerodynamics? I think it says specifically to the shots inside the cockpit. Those are the POV cameras.
All right. Well, there's no aerodynamics on the inside. There was definitely cameras I wanted to put on the exterior that were aerodynamic issues. So I didn't get those places. And there were some ones that were on the top looking back that had to be a special housing that took a lot of engineering to get those housings made. So those were difficult. But, when I did my tests in the L30 line, they were all hard mounts. I didn't need any stabilization. I think if I did get vibration, I'd want more, you know what I mean? So I don't want less stabilization. Our tolerance is because for safety reasons, the actor has to be able to eject. So there's a whole line that has to be completely cleared. So we had to even shave off part of the lenses to make sure that not even an eighth of an inch was sticking out beyond the shield. And because an F-18 has a bar that comes in the middle between them, we had that tolerance to deal with as well, because that had to be clear. If the canopy has to eject and then the canopy has to lift off, all the wires have to be cleared. We had some breakaway cables for some of the cables that were mounted to the canopy. So, that all had to be considered. So there's pyro that blows the canopy, and there's also underneath the seats that all has to be considered in camera placements and body placements of the cameras. So the deck was manufactured by we had a platform which was a hard mount where all the cameras were kind of placed, and I basically adjusted the actors. The seat was allowed to go up and down. So some actors were taller, some actors were shorter, but I went up before everyone flew. I just kind of found out their range and limitations. We found out their depth of field we need to go. I looked at kind of where they were flying to guess the exposure, because we had to guess the exposure because we didn't do auto exposure. And I don't like auto exposure. I like things going up and down, so I didn't want anything chasing it anyway. So and I guess probably I did probably 98%, probably right on the exposure. We'd look at the clouds and we say, yeah, it looks cloudy over there. They're going into the canyons. We look at 3D maps of the canyons about to go in to say how deep they're going to go, what the shadow angle is about that time, how shadow what part of the mission would be in the darkness. So we just the focus, the depth of field, and the height in relation to cameras before each flight.
Yeah. So we haven't really started talking too much about this, but I know on some of those follow, especially the Cinejet, you were probably dealing with a gimbal of some sort, like a shot over. And I'm curious, part of your choice as a DP when you get in a project is what do you think about lensing? Like, how do you test that as well? Like, obviously we saw your camera tests, but what's your process like when you think about lensing and what's the right lens for a project or a scene, or how does that work for you when you break down a scene or a script?
I mean, Top Gun, probably if I showed you that list of lenses that we had on the thing, it's a page. And then they're all for different reasons. We had, the 75 to 400 with a doubler for, on top of mountains. That would be a package they would take, with, the 25 to 300 from time to time. And they were all just depending on what they were doing. I did know I wanted some wide shots of it blowing up a mountain, so we didn't want to be, at the 400 end of that. We did want some close proximity, depending on who the pilots were, what the limitations of the ground were. That kind of determined which lenses and zooms kind of went out there. All the ground to air had to be kind of zooms. It had to be flexible. They were light units that kind of went up to these different mountains. It couldn't be like a bunch of primes going out there and guessing. That didn't work. But we were on the ground, shooting scenes. We did a lot. We shot a lot with Sigma primes. We shot a lot with we did some master primes on focal length 75 and up, and I used them at full frame. And I even liked how it didn't quite work. I thought that kind of did not work in a good way. I tested some. I think we got the Fuji full frame. We had it for a little short term time.
Yeah, you had the Premistas, right? Those when the Premistas were first being introduced, basically, and you were able to get your hands on probably one or two.
Yeah, a very short time. Shame on Fuji for that. Yanked it after I started liking it. Anyway, so
was that the longer lens, the 85 to 300? Sorry, the 80 to 250 Premista that you were using, or?
Yeah, I had the 80 to 350, and I also had a little bit of time with the other one as well, but all just too short to get like a whole rhythm with it. So. And a lot of times, we did want to be at my normal, shallow self, so we did some stuff with mostly on primes and shell depth of field for a lot of the interior work.
And I know for the shot over rig, you probably had to use zoom lenses there too for practicality reasons as well. So I think you used the Cabrio series for the 85 to 300 and maybe even the 20 to 120. Did you mainly go wide, or were you?
Yeah, we used both those lenses, and for different missions. So sometimes we go up the 85 to 300 for like some stacking missions, or to give sometimes more speed with ground speed kind of behind it. And so we use those for different reasons. This is my test of what would fit. I made this silly chart of what would fit in the camera, and that was kind of the invention of the Rialto that would kind of work with this 25 to 300. Kind of initially why it was made, but threading it through the F1 was a little bit difficult. But I found that if we went specific missions, we could be really specific about which primes we went up with.
Right. Do you find yourself primarily using zooms, or are you kind of sort of?
Well, like I said before, I mean, like like in the air, or just when you're doing air to air, I think zooms are pretty critical, to try to get the shot. But on ground, when I'm doing intimate scenes, I'm kind of on primes for that. I mean, it is not, I'm able to set the shot. Here's A, here's B, we're blocking. But with planes, it's a little bit different story. You're kind of grabbing, and you're, there's a little bit of different kind of finessing on the fly, that they did.
Right. And not to take this conversation to a completely different direction, but you had mentioned when we had spoken earlier that you think, as far as production, with COVID safety in mind, that you're starting to think that zooms are going to be really important to how film sets work these days.
Oh, Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. It could make things easier. I mean, I actually shot, this little thing, and I was getting late at night, and I had to use some primes. You know what I mean? So I just feel like, I don't know. I don't want to take anything out of the bag. I think everything has to be kind of looked at per situation. I mean, there's definitely situations where Zoom can definitely help you out. And, the 1885 is one lens that gets you down to a T2, which I think is definitely nice for depth of field, that you can kind of get nice depth of field with. But, everyone has to have their own look, I mean, there's anamorphics and there's just, everyone's not going to require, a zoom look. There's a lot of primes out there that give you different looks that may be right for your project. And I think you have to look at what you're doing and apply, this is the look I'm going, whether it's flary or anamorphic or these horrible, these old Kawas or whatever you want to get involved with that have these kind of barrel distortions and focus breathing, like, and you may want that as a story point. That's got to be, you got to determine your lens on that. So I hope with this COVID that we're not losing the craft and, our end goal about making beautiful images. I really, that we're allowed to kind of screw it up a little bit. We're allowed to kind of use aberrations as an expression,
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And then I have a personal question that's a little bit on topic, but it was mainly the idea that you have a classic film like Top Gun or Tron, and you are shooting now, of course, Top Gun Maverick. What is that like when you're thinking about, your work, your style, versus looking at, say, Jeffrey Kimball from the original Top Gun, or even Bruce Logan from the original Tron? Like, do you put little homages into these previous DPs, or are you just sort of taking it and saying, this is my story now?
No, I talked to Kimball a little bit, I spoke with him. And, funny enough, part of the reason why I took, Top Gun is that, I worked with Tony Scott on 3 movies. So I did, Crimson Tide as a gaffer. I worked with him on The Fan, and I did Enemy of the State. The first 2 with Derek Wolski, and the last one was with Danny Mandel, who have been really kind of great pushing me forward as well. So those were a lot of reasons why I did Top Gun. I felt, I don't know, very personal about it in some ways. And I really wanted to do a good job, for Tony. And, so I don't know. I have a little bit of a soft spot for that whole feeling.
Right.
But yes, I did want to. There is some nods definitely to Tony and the way it was shot, and to Jeffrey Kimball as well.
That's great. I believe we have a couple questions from our audience as well, so I'll make sure we leave some time for that. So, Ian, if you have anything that you want to jump in on, please do.
Thank you, Jeff. David Rudd would like to ask, can you talk about your early days as a gaffer and cameraman in music video days, and how that shaped you as a cameraman, all the experimentation, art, and risk-taking?
Music videos. Some were great, some were obviously not. They're a different animal. I mean, I started off, I did a lot of, rap videos in the very beginning. And it was such a different world because I was gaffing for Fincher and, I did all these. So it was a different world for me, that whole thing, as far as shooting. I mean, I did gaff a lot of music videos with Fincher in the past, but this whole mindset was a little bit different. And they seemed to like me, and they kept on hiring me over and over again. But sometimes experimentation, I'm not sure how experimentation was on that, or how that helped me. Interesting. It didn't help as much as I thought it would, because it's really a different thing. It's I'd like to say where I could experiment on much. I mean, I did a commercial for Fincher, which was probably the ugliest thing I've ever done. I mean, he probably wouldn't mind me saying that either. I did this Orville Redenbacher, which was like a thing for, anyway, you can look that up. The worst thing I ever shot. But anyway, I don't know. I think you look at each project and figure out how you can do the best for the project. So the music videos have a definitely like that's a different thing. You have to be fast. You have to be creative. You have to be how do you make something new out of it? So definitely, I like to be fast on set as well. So I think I'm fast.
Sort of related to that, there's another question from Chris who's asking, did you find the transition from set lighting to camera especially difficult? If so, how do you work past that and speed up your transition?
It kind of put me a lot to kind of figure out shots in previs. So I kind of figure out camera angles, and so that kind of that seemed to help. On Benjamin Buttons, because I was definitely very early on in my career. I made these books, this lookbook in the very beginning that I gave Fincher, and I just went with a still camera into the Nolan house and just shot all these different angles and different kind of lighting situations and what I felt kind of worked and did not work, just kind of on my own. I just had my own little couple days, just I don't know, by myself, just figuring it out. And previs kind of helps me figure it out as well, just to kind of pre-visualize and get an idea, and I kind of figure what camera angle is working, what lenses are working. This seems to work better long, seems to be better short.
Along those lines, we're being asked, is there any previs tools that you particularly like to use? I think this is in regards to software.
Oh, software? I mean, my crew works in Vectorworks. So I found that Cinema 4D takes in Vectorworks because I don't find Vectorworks lighting all that great. And since I want to also play with lenses and lighting, I kind of use Cinema 4D for that. And I find it fast, and I find it pretty intuitive. That's what I use, but I'm sure there's other things that other people can use. I find those other ones, there's other ones that are just way too complicated for me. And what I do a lot for movies, I get the sets, which is I'm actually getting now, and I'm working on a project that's coming up. Hopefully, we'll shoot soon. And I'm working out skylight placements. I'm lighting the sets and figuring out, does this skylight need to be bigger, smaller, move it to the left, move it to the right, because it takes place a lot of skylights in the scene. So I'm just trying to make sure that in previs, I can kind of get an idea before they build it and we're stuck with it, that I'm getting what I want. So that's what I use on my own previs. And I kind of just tinker around by myself for a little bit, just really figuring out camera angles. And I send something, and I'll send it to the director and I'll say, hey, does this kind of make sense? Does this make sense? And then he'll say yes or not.
To that end, we have another question. And that is, how do you establish your relationship with the director, and how would you recommend young directors find cinematographers to work with consistently?
Wow. Well, I guess people ask me about like how I got started, but the way I got started was probably not the best. I mean, I had a friend who just, he was just into drugs, and then he got fired, and then he hired me, and then I took his place in this being a stage manager, and then I was working for a gaffer who was also doing tons of drugs, and then I was his electrician, and then I was covering him so often that basically the DP just called me instead. So I guess in a way, the way I moved up was just a lot of people's poor choices of drugs, I guess. And then I just kind of landed the job. So that introduced me to Derek Wolski. So I did, I did The Crow with Wolski. I did Crimson Tide and The Fan with Wolski. And I did tons of commercials, and we just hooked it off. We hit it really, really well. And then from then on, I met Harris, and I did some movies for Harris. So I kind of, in the beginning, I kind of took those two people that really helped me out and their ideas. And I kind of, initially it was a lot about them in my ideas when I kind of did jobs, but then eventually I kind of found my own place, I feel, which is a little bit different. but that's kind of my start, which is not, and it took a long time, you know. I mean, I started in the business in '84, and I started shooting full-time shooting in 2000. So a lot of students probably don't want to hear that, you know.
Thank you, Jeff.
I mean, I had a follow-up question to that, which is, I think you sort of already answered, which is there any advice that you would give a young cinematographer starting their career now, aside from getting friends, you know, becoming friends with folks that are making maybe ill-advised choices?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, I just think if you could hang around the people you want to shoot for, I mean, do that, you know. I think that's the best way to kind of get something coming your way. I mean, if you could be, you know, an assistant editor and then find your way into, you know, editing a project you want to do for that, cinematography. Some people I've seen people go through the camera department, whether that's where I went through the lighting department. I think that's a little more rare. Most DPs seem to go through the camera department. But it is just, you know, it is being around the people, you know, you can be, and how to get on set. Like, figure out how to get on set in some sort of form. Make a face for you. Make people recognize you. Even though you may be doing, I was happy in every single one of my positions. I was a happy electrician. I loved that job. I was a happy best boy. I loved that job. I was a happy gaffer. I was happy, and I wasn't miserable in any of these positions. And I feel like people just wanted to be around you. So maybe it's good just to be someone who wants to work with you and be around with you. And you know, DP, hang around with a gaffer that you get along with. I mean, Wolski and I are really good friends, and I was really good friends with the late Harris. You know, he was a good guy. So I don't know, try to build strong friendships.
Great. We have one more question. Maybe we can fit this in because we're going to get tight on time here. But could you describe a time when someone disagreed with your artistic vision and what you would say is the best way to come into a fair agreement?
I guess it depends on why they Jesus, I'm being invaded. I guess have I ever had a strong disagreement with someone? Yeah, I mean, there was one job I did where me and the director didn't hit it off really well. I kind of remember that to this day. It was hard to tell, like, if he was joking with me or not, but he said he wanted it to make it look like Jackass the movie. And that was his reference. And I was trying to figure out what that is. Is that just like a lot of handheld and sloppy, you know, is that just sloppy, you know, just yeehaw framing? And I said, really? That's what you made it want to look like? So he went into there, and I kind of thought with this, it wasn't my style, but okay, let's go with this frame of mind. And then it turned out that he wanted this kind of slow motion. It was something else. And yeah, that job was a nightmare for me because I was in one gear, you know, with one set of plans and one way to shoot it, and then he wanted this kind of elegant dolly movement, and that was on the day, so that was really frightening. And then I realized what it was, and again, it was drug related.
Thank you. I'm sure there's quite a few people out there that are so appreciative of your time with us right now. And one of the burning questions that they're going to have for you is, what do you look for? What sets someone apart when they're trying to be part of a camera department?
I just like, for me, I just like a good attitude around me all the time. Someone I want to be around, you know. And then sometimes I'll see someone who has like a little bit of a spark, and I've been known to kind of, from time to time, say, hey, can you man this camera for me? You know, for me, Eric Messerschmidt was like one of those guys that was a gaffer for me, and he's doing really well. But he was one guy I know with confidence I could say, go off and get that shot for me, and I just know it will be, amazing. So I just feel like he gave me that sense of confidence, So I feel like, and he's doing amazing. I mean, I think that guy is doing amazing work, and he was my gaffer for very short, and I do miss him. We had such good dialogue about just, about creation and new ways to light, and he was always very like a spark, like around me, and I just love that spark. I mean, so I mean, if I could have, right now I'm looking for a gaffer, and then I just need that spark.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to the folks who submitted those questions. They were all great. And if anyone wants to drop Claudio a resume, we'll put your email address in down. We won't do that if you don't want that. But
no, it's okay. I mean, I do got some people, but yeah, it's all.
Yeah, and I think what you said is really resonates true, which is you surround yourself with people that are like-minded but yet challenge you at the same time. So I really appreciate that insight.
Yeah, there's something to watch out for, because sometimes if you go off and you're doing, throw the baby out of the house 5 or whatever it is like that, and you're surrounding yourself with those people, I mean, don't be surprised if that's what you're going to find yourself around, is that kind of work. You know what I mean? So it might be an event, you might say, wow, I'm in. Yeah, but you got to be prepared that you might be in that, so that's just, it's careful steering. And I still kind of do that. I'm careful about what I do next. I'm careful about who I work with. I find out resumes, I kind of find out about them. How are they to work with? Are they difficult? I don't really need to work with, I don't want to work with difficult people. I work with, I mean, David is great to work with. Ang Lee was great to work with. Joe Kaczynski is amazing to work with. I mean, I seem to be very fortunate to, I've at least kept it in a really amazing place, a pool of people to work with.
That's great. And again, thank you so much for your insight and your time. And I think we'll just wrap up today's conversation with one final question, which is a bit of a personal one, which is, what are you watching yourself these days? Especially during, I mean, I know you're busy with DIs, obviously, for Top Gun, but, what are you watching these days, and what are you doing to stay creative outside of anything Top Gun related?
I don't know. You know what I do, actually? I've been just at my house, make my own dumb music videos with my daughter. That's kind of what I do. She makes music. We kind of do things together. I just find we had a little rain scene out of my house the other day. I just had a little, I made my own rain and did a little cool light from outside and did this little kind of noir thing. And, for me, I just like messing around the house, just doing things and shooting little videos every now and then. So just to keep myself a little bit from going stir crazy while we're all unemployed.
Well, again, thank you so much for all of your insights and sharing your wisdom with us. And I want to thank you again, Claudio, for joining us today for our Creative Forces session. So with that, I think we'll sign off for today. Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. This video, of course, will be available on our YouTube channel. And once again, big round of applause for Claudio Miranda for joining us today. So thank you so much. And we will catch you on the next Creative Forces event. Take care.
All right. Thanks.